Lucian Blackwood strode into his penthouse suite at the Blackwood Tower, the sprawling glass and steel headquarters of his vast business empire. At 27, he was the youngest CEO to helm Blackwood International, the largest conglomerate in the Philippines, with interests spanning real estate, technology, and luxury goods. Lucian was a man who commanded attention without effort. His imposing 6'2" frame carried the presence of someone who always got what he wanted. His chiseled jawline, high cheekbones, and piercing blue eyes, uncommon for a man of his heritage, gave him an air of unattainable perfection. His dark blonde hair, always immaculately styled, completed his resemblance to a living Adonis. It was no surprise that women fawned over him, and men either feared or envied him. But Lucian didn't care about admiration. In his world, power was the only thing worth pursuing, and emotions were weaknesses that he had no time for. Lucian tossed his tailored navy blazer onto the plush leather sofa as he poured himself a glass of whiskey from the bar in the corner of his living room. The amber liquid gleamed in the dim light, much like his thoughts, sharp, deliberate, and calculated. A knock interrupted his momentary solitude. "Enter," he commanded, his deep voice echoing through the expansive space. His secretary, Lorenz Marquez, stepped inside. A sharp man in his late 20s, Lorenz was one of the few people Lucian trusted implicitly. He carried a tablet, his posture rigid as he approached. "You have a dinner meeting with the chairman of Cyto Corporation tomorrow night," Lorenz began, his tone professional. "And the head of the Philippines Economic Forum has requested your attendance for next month's summit." Lucian swirled the whiskey in his glass, his gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Decline the summit, send Victor in my place, and move the Cyto dinner to next week." "I'll be unavailable." Lorenz blinked, caught off guard. "Unavailable, sir? May I ask why?" Lucian turned his icy blue eyes on him, his expression unreadable. "Because I have personal matters to attend to," he said curtly. Lorenz was wise enough not to push further. "Understood," he said, making a note on his tablet. "Is there anything else you need?" Lucian placed the glass down on the marble counter with a soft clink. "Yes. Find me a woman." Lorenz's professional demeanor faltered for a fraction of a second. "A woman, sir?" "Yes," Lucian said with a faint smirk, recognizing his surprise. "I want a woman who can bear me a son. Someone healthy, discreet, and suitable to produce an heir for the Blackwood legacy. And make it clear, this is a business arrangement, nothing more." Lorenz straightened his posture. "Understood. I'll begin the search immediately." "Good." Lucian leaned against the counter, his smirk fading. "And Lorenz, ensure she understands there will be no emotional entanglements. I don't have time for attachments." "Of course, sir," Lorenz replied, though a flicker of unease crossed his features. He knew his boss was ruthless in business, but this level of detachment in personal matters was unsettling. "I'll have a preliminary list prepared within the week." Lucian nodded, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. Once he was gone, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Love was a concept Lucian had discarded long ago. His parents had taught him that emotions were liabilities, and love was the greatest weakness of all. His father, Richard Blackwood, had been a shrewd businessman, but a cold, unyielding man who had driven Lucian to perfection through relentless discipline. His mother, a socialite with a penchant for extravagance, had sought validation through material possessions rather than nurturing her son. Lucian had learned early that vulnerability led to exploitation. His university years had solidified that belief. The fleeting relationships he had indulged in were nothing more than distractions, temporary amusements that never touched his heart. Women were drawn to his power and wealth, and he was happy to keep them at arm's length, but the desire for an heir was different. This wasn't about love, it was about legacy. The Blackwood Empire required a successor, someone to carry the name, and the responsibility of maintaining its dominance. Lucian's lips curled into a faint smile as he imagined molding his son into the perfect heir, free from the weaknesses that plagued lesser men. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. The call was answered almost immediately. "Victor," Lucian said, addressing his cousin and COO, "I need you to review the legal contracts Lorenz will draft for a new arrangement I'm planning. It involves securing an heir." Victor chuckled on the other end. "Always so calculated, cousin. You really know how to take the romance out of life." "Romance is for fools," Lucian replied dryly. "This is about ensuring the future of the Blackwood name. Nothing more." "Well, I can't say I'm surprised," Victor said, "but are you sure you want to handle it this way? There are other options. Surrogacy, adoption." "No," Lucian interrupted. "I want my heir to be born the natural way. No clinical detachment. It's cleaner this way, and I'll ensure absolute control over the process." Victor sighed. "All right, send me the details and I'll make sure everything's airtight." Lucian ended the call and set the phone aside. For him, this was just another deal, a transaction like any other. Yet, as he looked out at the cityscape, once more, a small voice at the back of his mind questioned whether this decision was as straightforward as he wanted to believe. The next morning, Lorenz arrived with a file containing profiles of women who met Lucian's criteria. He placed the folder on his desk with his usual efficiency. "These are the preliminary candidates," he said. "All are in excellent health, with no genetic predispositions to illness. They've been vetted for confidentiality and suitability." Lucian opened the folder, his eyes scanning the photographs and accompanying details. Each woman was undeniably attractive, with impressive credentials, but none of them sparked even a flicker of interest. He flipped through the profiles quickly, his expression growing more impassive with each page. "None of these will do," he said flatly, closing the folder and pushing it aside. Lorenz frowned slightly. "Sir, these women are the best candidates, based on your specifications. May I ask what you're looking for that these profiles lack?" Lucian leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he considered his question. "I need someone who intrigues me," he said at last. "Someone who isn't predictable. These women are too perfect, too curated. Find me someone who stands out, someone who doesn't fit the mold." Lorenz hesitated but nodded. "I'll broaden the search parameters." "Do that," Lucian said. "And Lorenz, make sure this remains discreet. I don't want any leaks to the press." "Understood, sir," he replied before leaving the office. As the door closed, behind him, Lucian allowed himself a rare smile. He wasn't sure why, but the thought of finding someone different, someone who could challenge his expectations, was oddly exhilarating. Perhaps this was more than just a transaction after all. Yet, even as the thought crossed his mind, Lucian quickly dismissed it. He wasn't looking for a partner or a relationship. This was about control, about securing his legacy. Anything beyond that was irrelevant. That evening, Lucian attended a gala hosted by one of his company's key partners. The ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits, filled with the elite of Philippine society. As always, Lucian was the center of attention, his presence commanding the room. Women approached him with practiced smiles and feigned laughter, each hoping to catch his interest. But Lucian brushed them off with polite indifference. As he sipped his champagne, his gaze swept over the crowd. A figure near the edge of the room caught his attention, a young her apart from the rest. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and her simple black dress highlighted her natural beauty rather than overpowering it. She wasn't like the others. There was an air of quiet strength about her that intrigued him. Lucian's lips curved into a faint smirk. Perhaps tonight wouldn't be as tedious as he had anticipated. He set his glass down and began making his way toward her, his mind already calculating his next move. The grand ballroom of the Valencia Hotel glittered with opulence, every detail a testament to the host's wealth and prestige. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a warm golden glow, reflecting off the polished marble floors. The air hummed with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and the murmur of polite conversation. This was a gathering of the elite, where alliances were forged, deals were sealed, and egos were put on display. Ashen stepped into the venue with an air of effortless elegance, drawing every gaze in the room like a magnet. At 25, Ashen exuded a rare combination of beauty and poise. His sharply tailored black tuxedo hugged his lean frame perfectly, the satin lapels catching the light as he moved. The crisp white shirt underneath was unbuttoned just enough to hint at the smooth skin beneath, while his bow tie hung untied around his collar, lending him a roguish charm. His black hair was artfully tousled, and his sharp cheekbones, almond-shaped hazel eyes, and perfectly symmetrical features rendered him almost ethereal. Walking beside him was Arnold Javier, his secretary turned escort for the evening. Lorenz wore a sleek midnight blue suit, his sharp features framed by his meticulously styled jet-black hair. Together, they were an arresting sight, commanding attention without trying. Conversations faltered as heads turned, and whispers filled the room. "Looks like we've caused a scene," Ashen murmured under his breath, a hint of amusement playing on his lips. Arnold smirked as he adjusted the cuffs of his suit. "Well, sir, if they can't handle perfection, that's on them." Ashen chuckled softly, but said nothing more. He was already scanning the room, his sharp eyes taking in the familiar faces and mentally cataloging potential allies and threats. This gala, hosted by one of his business partners, was meant to be an opportunity to network, but Ashen found these events tiresome. It was always the same: hollow pleasantries, thinly veiled power plays, and people vying for his attention. Not because they cared about him, but because they wanted something from him. They hadn't even made it halfway across the room when the first wave of admirers descended upon them. "Ashen, it's been ages. You look incredible tonight," gushed one woman, her diamond necklace glittering as she reached for his hand. Ashen offered her a polite smile, gently withdrawing his hand. "Thank you. You look lovely as well." More guests followed, each eager to bask in his presence. Men and women alike vied for his attention, their compliments growing increasingly effusive. Lorenz handled most of them with his usual charm, deflecting conversations and steering Ashen away when things became too tedious. "Remind me why I agreed to come here," Ashen muttered to Lorenz as they finally reached their table. "To remind everyone why you're at the top," Lorenz replied with a wry grin. "And to make me suffer alongside you." Ashen laughed softly but didn't respond. He was already reaching for a glass of champagne when a new figure approached their table. Lance Roxas, the son of the evening's host, was a striking man with a confident stride and an easy smile. His tailored gray suit highlighted his athletic build, and his dark eyes gleamed with a mixture of curiosity and mischief as they landed on Ashen. "Ashen Blythe Montemayor," Lance greeted, his voice smooth as silk. "I was hoping I'd run into you tonight." Ashen raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Roxas," he said coolly, shaking Lance's offered hand. "A pleasure." Lance pulled up a chair, his movements casual but calculated. "You know, I've followed your career for years. Your reputation precedes you." Ashen sipped his champagne, his disinterest barely masked. "Is that so?" "Yes," Lance said with a grin. "You're a hard man to figure out, but that only makes you more intriguing." Lorenz, seated beside Ashen, fought to suppress a laugh. The sight of Lance trying so hard to charm Ashen was amusing, especially since Ashen seemed wholly unimpressed. "He's like a cat batting at a toy," Lorenz muttered under his breath, earning a warning glance from Ashen. Lance leaned forward, undeterred. "I admire your discipline, your drive. But I wonder, do you ever let anyone in? Or is that wall around you as impenetrable as it seems?" Ashen set his glass down, his hazel eyes narrowing. "Mr. Roxas, I appreciate your interest, but I don't recall inviting you to analyze me." The sharpness in his tone made Lance falter, but only for a moment. He smiled, as if relishing the challenge. "Fair enough, but I believe every wall can be breached. It's just a matter of time." From a shadowed corner of the room, Lucian Blackwood observed the scene with growing irritation. He had been entertaining a young woman, a potential candidate for his Heir project, but his attention had been stolen the moment Ashen walked in. Lucian recognized him instantly. The man from the restaurant, the one who had stared at him with that strange, accusing look. Seeing him now, surrounded by admirers, Lucian felt a surge of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't jealousy, he told himself. No, it was irritation. Yes, irritation at the way everyone fawned over Ashen, as if he were some kind of prize. When Lance Roxas joined Ashen's table, Lucian's irritation deepened. The sight of Lance leaning in close, laughing at something Ashen's secretary said, made Lucian's jaw tighten. He hated the way they looked together, as if they were part of some exclusive club he wasn't invited to. Before he could stop himself, Lucian excused himself from his current company and moved to a nearby table where he could keep a closer eye on Ashen. He told himself it was purely out of curiosity. After all, it wasn't every day someone made such an impression on him. When Ashen suddenly rose from his seat and whispered something to Lawrence, Lucian's eyes followed his every move. He watched as Ashen made his way to the veranda, the cool, night air ruffling his hair as he stepped outside. Lucian didn't hesitate. He followed. Ashen leaned against the ornate railing, his champagne flute dangling loosely from his fingers. The city lights sprawled out below him, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was replaying Lance's words in his head, annoyed that someone he barely knew had the audacity to question him. The sound of footsteps made him glance over his shoulder. His hazel eyes darkened when he saw who had joined him. "You," Ashen said, flatly. Lucian stopped a few feet away, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." Ashen turned back to the view, dismissing him. "Then leave." Lucian's lips twitched into a smirk. "You're as charming as ever." Ashen's grip on the glass tightened. "What do you want?" "I wanted to talk," Lucian said, his tone calm but firm. "About why you're so determined to hate me." Ashen let out a bitter laugh. "I don't hate you. I don't even know you." "Then why do you look at me like I've wronged you?" Lucian pressed, stepping closer. "I've been trying to figure it out ever since that night at the restaurant." Ashen turned to face him, his eyes blazing. "You don't get to demand answers from me. Not here, not ever." Lucian's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of frustration. "You're awfully defensive for someone who claims not to care." "I don't care," Ashen snapped. "I just don't like arrogant men who think they can control everything." Lucian bristled at the accusation, his blue eyes narrowing. "Control isn't arrogance, it's survival." Ashen took a step forward, their faces now inches apart. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension crackled between them, electric and undeniable. Lucian found himself staring at Ashen's lips, the sharp curve of his jaw, the fire in his hazel eyes. He hated how much it fascinated him. "Why do you hate me?" Lucian asked again, his voice softer this time. Ashen's expression faltered, but only for a moment. "Because men like you ruin everything they touch." The word struck harder than Lucian expected, but he refused to let it show. "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think." "Maybe I don't want to," Ashen shot back, shoving past him and disappearing into the ballroom. Lucian stood there staring after him, a strange ache forming in his chest. He didn't understand why Ashen affected him so much, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let this go.